Picture this. You're standing in a boardroom filled with men in expensive suits, their eyes drilling holes through your confidence. The air is thick with disbelief and barely concealed anger. Someone just asked the question that would haunt you for months. Who authorized her to be here? But here's the thing about Sarah Chun that nobody in that room knew yet. She had spent her entire life proving that authorization comes from within, not from a signature on a piece of paper. What they were about to witness wasn't just a woman defending her right to be there. They were about to see someone rewrite the rules of an entire industry, one devastating comeback at a time. This isn't just another story about breaking glass ceilings. This is about what happens when someone refuses to ask for permission to change the world. And trust me, what Sarah did next didn't just shock everyone in that room. It changed the course of her life forever. Ready to find out how a single moment of being questioned turned into a revolution? Because what you're about to read will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about courage, determination, and the power of never backing down. Sarah Chun had always been the kind of person who colored outside the lines, but she never imagined that trait would land her in the middle of a corporate battlefield at 32 years old. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday in downtown Seattle, with rain drumming against the windows of her small apartment and the familiar buzz of her phone alarm cutting through her dreams. She had been working as a junior software engineer at TechVision Industries for 3 years, quietly building applications and fixing bugs while watching her male colleagues get promoted around her. Sarah had submitted the same reports, worked the same overtime hours, and solved problems that had stumped senior developers. But somehow her name never appeared on the promotion list that circulated every quarter. The company was preparing for their biggest presentation of the year, a pitch to Global Systems Corporation that could secure a $50 million contract. For months, the development team had been working on a revolutionary AI system that could predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy. Sarah had been part of the core team that built the algorithm, spending countless nights debugging code and optimizing performance while her colleagues took credit during the morning meetings. 3 days before the presentation, disaster struck. The lead developer, Marcus Webb, called in sick with what would turn out to be a severe case of pneumonia. His backup, Derek Chin, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, had been in a car accident that left him with a concussion. Suddenly, the company faced the terrifying possibility of presenting their most important pitch without the technical expertise needed to answer detailed questions about their system. Sarah had been working late that evening when she overheard the panicked conversation between CEO Robert Hartman and CTO Jennifer Walsh. They were standing outside the conference room, voices hushed but urgent, discussing their impossible situation. The client meeting was scheduled for Friday morning, and they had no one who understood the system well enough to present it confidently. That was when Sarah made the decision that would define her career. She knocked on the conference room door and stepped inside without waiting for permission. Both executives looked up, surprised to see her there so late. "I know the system better than anyone," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I wrote 60% of the core algorithm, and I can answer any technical question they might have. Let me present it." Robert Hartman's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked suspiciously like amusement. He was a tall man with graying hair who had built TechVision from a 2-person startup into a company with over 300 employees. He had never spoken directly to Sarah before, despite her years with the company. "Sarah, isn't it?" he said, glancing at Jennifer for confirmation. "I appreciate the offer, but this presentation requires someone with serious executive experience. The client will be sending their top people, and we need to match their level of authority." Jennifer Walsh nodded in agreement. She was a brilliant woman who had broken through the tech industry's barriers 20 years earlier, but she seemed to have forgotten what that journey felt like. The technical aspects are just one part of the presentation. They'll want to discuss budget allocations, timeline management, and strategic integration. This isn't really your area. Sarah felt something hot and sharp rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "With all due respect, I understand the system's capabilities better than anyone else in this building. I know every line of code, every potential limitation, and every optimization we've implemented. If they ask technical questions that I can't answer, then the system isn't ready for deployment anyway. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying her with the kind of look that made Sarah feel like she was being evaluated for something she hadn't applied for. Even if you knew the technical side perfectly, this meeting is about more than just explaining how something works. It's about inspiring confidence in our entire organization. Our clients need to see that we're serious players in this industry. The unspoken message was clear, and Sarah heard it loud and clear. A young Asian woman wouldn't inspire the kind of confidence that their primarily white, male clients expected to see. She was competent enough to build their systems, but not authoritative enough to represent them. But Sarah had faced this kind of dismissal her entire life, from elementary school teachers who assumed she was quiet and obedient, to college professors who were surprised when she challenged their assumptions, to her current colleagues who somehow never noticed her contributions until they needed someone to blame for problems. She had learned to push back in ways that couldn't be easily dismissed. "I'll make a deal with you," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Let me do a practice presentation tomorrow morning. Give me 15 minutes to present the system to whoever you want in the room. If you don't think I can handle the real thing, then we'll figure out another solution. But if I prove that I understand both the technical and business implications of what we've built, then I get to present on Friday." Jennifer and Robert exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They were clearly not used to junior employees making demands, especially not junior employees who looked like Sarah. But their options were limited, and they both knew it. "Fine," Robert said after a long pause. "Tomorrow morning at 9. You'll present to the entire executive team, plus anyone else who's available. But I'm warning you, Sarah, this isn't a friendly audience. If you can't handle the pressure tomorrow, there's no way you'll survive Friday." Sarah nodded and left the room, her heart pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. She had just committed herself to the most important 15 minutes of her career, and she had less than 12 hours to prepare. She spent the entire night working, not just on her presentation slides, but on researching Global Systems Corporation. She learned about their corporate culture, their recent acquisitions, their strategic goals, and the backgrounds of the executives who would be attending the meeting. By morning, she knew as much about their business as she did about the system she had helped create. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the office an hour early, dressed in her most professional suit and carrying a presentation that she had rehearsed dozens of times. Word had apparently spread about her challenge to the executives, because the conference room was packed with people who normally wouldn't attend a technical presentation. Everyone from senior developers to the head of human resources had found reasons to be there. Robert Hartman stood at the front of the room, looking like a man who expected to be entertained. "Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Chun has volunteered to present our AI system to Global Systems Corporation. She's convinced us to give her a trial run this morning. Let's see what she's got." Sarah walked to the front of the room, connected her laptop to the projector, and looked out at the sea of faces that ranged from curious to skeptical to openly hostile. She recognized the expression on most of their faces. It was the same look she had been getting her entire career, the look that said, "Prove you belong here." For a moment, the weight of what she was attempting hit her fully. She wasn't just presenting a software system, she was challenging an entire corporate hierarchy that had been in place long before she arrived. But then, she remembered every late night she had spent debugging code while her colleagues went home to their families, every meeting where her ideas had been ignored until a male colleague repeated them, every performance review that praised her work while promoting someone else. Sarah clicked to her first slide and began to speak. "Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present the most sophisticated market prediction system that TechVision has ever developed. But before I tell you how it works, I want to tell you what it can do for Global Systems Corporation that no other system can." She had their attention now. Instead of starting with technical specifications, she began with a business case. explaining how their system could save global systems millions of dollars in the first year alone by predicting market shifts before their competitors even recognized them. She spoke with confidence and clarity, using language that connected technical capabilities to bottom-line results. As she moved through her presentation, Sarah watched the expressions in the room begin to change. The skeptical looks softened into interest, then into genuine engagement. She answered questions about data security, scalability, and integration challenges with the kind of detailed knowledge that only came from intimate familiarity with the system's architecture. When Jennifer Walsh asked about potential limitations, Sarah didn't try to hide them. Instead, she explained exactly where the system's boundaries were and how they had designed workarounds for the most common edge cases. When Robert Hartman challenged her on implementation timelines, she pulled up detailed project schedules that showed she understood not just the technical requirements, but the business realities of large-scale software deployment. 15 minutes stretched into 25, then into 35, as the questions kept coming, and Sarah kept answering them with increasing confidence. She wasn't just presenting a system anymore, she was demonstrating that she understood their business better than many of the senior executives in the room. Finally, Robert called for a break and asked Sarah to step outside while the executive team discussed her performance. She waited in the hallway, her heart racing but her mind clear. She had given everything she had to those 35 minutes, and she knew she had done well. The question was whether doing well would be enough in a company that had never given someone like her this kind of responsibility. When they called her back into the room, Robert's expression was unreadable. The entire executive team was seated around the conference table, looking serious and official. "Sarah," Robert began, "that was an impressive presentation. You clearly understand both the technical and business aspects of this system better than we realized." Sarah felt a surge of hope, followed immediately by the suspicion that a but was coming. "However," Robert continued, and we've decided that this client meeting is too important to risk on someone who's never presented to this level of client before. Jennifer will handle the presentation, using the materials you've prepared." The room fell silent. Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. They were taking her work, her knowledge, and her preparation, but they weren't taking her. "I understand the technical aspects," Jennifer added, her voice gentle but firm. "And I think your presentation materials will be very helpful. We'll make sure you get appropriate credit for your contributions." Sarah looked around the room at all the faces that had been so engaged during her presentation, now carefully avoiding eye contact. She realized that no matter how well she performed, no matter how much she knew, there would always be another reason why she wasn't quite ready for the next opportunity. But instead of accepting their decision quietly, Sarah did something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. "No," she said. The single word hung in the air like a challenge. Robert's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Sarah repeated, her voice stronger now. "You asked me to prove that I could handle this presentation, and I did. You asked me questions that I answered completely and accurately. You saw that I understand this system and this client better than anyone else in this room. But now you're moving the goalposts." Jennifer looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, we're not trying to be unfair. We're just being realistic about the client's expectations." "Realistic about what, exactly?" Sarah asked. "Are you saying that I don't look like what Global Systems Corporation expects to see from a technology company? Are you saying that my technical expertise and business knowledge don't matter as much as my appearance?" The room was completely silent now. Sarah had just said out loud what everyone had been thinking, but nobody had been willing to acknowledge. Robert's face had gone slightly red. "Sarah, you're putting words in my mouth. This decision is based on experience and client relations, nothing more." "Then, give me the experience," Sarah said. "Let me prove that I can handle client relations. Because if you don't, you're sending a message to every woman in this company that no matter how hard we work or how much we know, we'll never be trusted with the important opportunities." She paused, looking directly at Jennifer, who had once been the only woman in rooms just like this one. And you're sending a message to Global Systems Corporation that TechVision's most knowledgeable technical person isn't important enough to present their own work. What does that say about the quality and importance of the system we've built? The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat and the quiet hum of the air conditioning system. She had just challenged the entire executive team in front of a room full of witnesses, and there was no taking it back. Finally, Robert spoke. The meeting is Friday at 10 a.m. Don't make us regret this decision. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she tried to speak. She had won, but she knew the real battle was just beginning. Now she had to prove not just that she could present the system, but that she deserved to be in rooms like this one. As the meeting broke up and people filed out of the conference room, Sarah realized that she had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She was no longer the quiet engineer who built systems in the background. She was the woman who had demanded her place at the table, and now everyone would be watching to see if she could keep it. The 2 days between Sarah's confrontation with the executive team and the Global Systems Corporation meeting felt like the longest 48 hours of her life. Word had spread throughout the office about what had happened in the conference room, and Sarah found herself at the center of attention in ways she had never experienced before. Some of her colleagues were supportive, stopping by her desk to offer encouragement and share their own stories of being overlooked for opportunities. Maria Santos, a senior developer who had been with the company for 5 years, told Sarah about the time she had been passed over for a team lead position that went to a man with less experience. "The difference is you actually spoke up," Maria said. "Most of us just accept it and hope things will change eventually." But not everyone was pleased with Sarah's boldness. Derek Chun, who had recovered enough from his concussion to return to work, made several pointed comments about people who don't know their place and junior employees who think they can skip the chain of command. His attitude reflected a broader sentiment among some of the senior staff who saw Sarah's promotion to the presentation as a dangerous precedent. The most challenging reaction came from Marcus Webb, who returned to work on Thursday, still weak from his illness, but determined to reclaim control of the situation. He sought Sarah out at her desk, looking pale but determined. "I hear you're presenting my system tomorrow," he said, his voice hoarse but carrying an edge of accusation. "Our system," Sarah corrected gently. "I know you're not feeling well, Marcus. Maybe you should still be home resting. I built the core architecture for this project," Marcus continued, ignoring her concern. "I've been working on predictive algorithms for 8 years. You've been here for 3 years, and most of that time you were working on user interface design." Sarah felt the familiar frustration that came with having her contributions minimized, but she kept her voice calm. "I wrote the optimization algorithms that made your architecture actually work with real-world data. I spent 6 months debugging performance issues that no one else could solve. And I designed the integration protocols that allow the system to communicate with existing corporate databases." Marcus leaned against her desk, and Sarah could see that even this short conversation was exhausting him. Despite her frustration with his attitude, she felt genuine concern for his health. "Look," she said, softening her tone, "I know this is your project as much as anyone's. But you're sick, and Derek is injured, and someone needs to present this system tomorrow. I'm not trying to steal credit or take over your work. I'm trying to make sure all of our work doesn't go to waste because there's no one healthy enough to present it." Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Just don't screw it up," he said finally, before walking slowly back to his own desk. That evening, Sarah stayed late once again, but this time she wasn't alone. Jennifer Walsh appeared at her desk around 7 p.m., carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking more approachable than Sarah had ever seen her. "Mind if I sit down?" Jennifer asked, settling into the chair beside Sarah's desk without waiting for an answer. They sat in silence for a moment, both staring at Sarah's presentation materials spread across 2 monitors. Finally, Jennifer spoke. 20 years ago, I was the only woman in most of the rooms I walked into. I had to fight for every opportunity, prove myself over and over again and deal with people who assumed I was someone's secretary instead of someone's supervisor. Sarah nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading. I thought I was making things easier for the women who came after me. Jennifer continued. I thought that by breaking through those barriers, I was opening doors that would stay open. But watching you in that conference room the other day, I realized I might have actually made things harder. Sarah looked up from her screen, confused. What do you mean? I mean that somewhere along the way, I started believing that the way to succeed was to become indispensable within the existing system, rather than challenging the system itself. I learned to play the game so well that I forgot the game was rigged. Jennifer paused, taking a sip of her coffee before continuing. When Robert suggested that you weren't ready for this presentation, I agreed with him. Not because I don't think you're capable, but because I've been conditioned to think that readiness means something different for women than it does for men. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and uncomfortable. What changed your mind? Sarah asked. You did, Jennifer said simply. When you called us out on our decision, you reminded me of something I had forgotten. Sometimes the most important qualification for an opportunity is the courage to demand it. Jennifer stood up, gathering her things. Tomorrow is going to be challenging in ways you can't anticipate yet. The technical presentation is just the beginning. These clients will test you in ways that have nothing to do with your knowledge of the system. They'll question your authority, your experience, and your right to be in that room. Are you prepared for that? Sarah considered the question seriously. I don't know if anyone can really be prepared for that kind of treatment. But I know I'm tired of letting other people decide what I'm capable of. Good answer, Jennifer said, heading for the elevator. I'll see you tomorrow morning. And, Sarah, make them remember why they need what we've built. Friday morning arrived gray and rainy, fitting Sarah's nervous energy perfectly. She arrived at the office 2 hours early, not because she needed more preparation time, but because she couldn't sit still at home any longer. She had chosen her most professional outfit, a navy blue suit that her mother had helped her pick out for job interviews 3 years earlier. Looking at herself in the bathroom mirror, she saw a young woman who was about to attempt something that could change the entire trajectory of her career. The Global Systems Corporation team arrived at exactly 10 a.m., and Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she watched them through the conference room windows. There were 6 of them, 5 men and 1 woman, all dressed in expensive suits and carrying themselves with the confidence of people who were used to being the most important people in any room they entered. Robert Hartman made the introductions, and Sarah paid careful attention to each name and title. The leader was James Morrison, Executive Vice President of Technology Development, a man in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes who seemed to assess everything he looked at. The woman was Diana, Chun no relation, despite the shared surname, Chief Information Officer, who appeared to be about Jennifer's age and carried herself with similar authority. As they settled into the conference room, Sarah noticed several subtle dynamics that she filed away for later reference. James Morrison sat at the head of the table, clearly establishing himself as the decision-maker. Diana Chun chose a seat that gave her a clear view of everyone else in the room, suggesting she was there to observe and evaluate rather than lead. The other 4 men ranged in age from their 30s to their 60s, and Sarah could tell from their posture and attention that they were technical experts rather than executives. Robert began with the standard corporate pleasantries, thanking Global Systems for their interest and talking about the potential partnership between their companies. Sarah listened with half her attention while using the other half to study the client's reactions and body language. When Robert began to introduce her, Sarah felt the room's energy shift in subtle but unmistakable ways. I'd like you to meet Sarah Chun, one of our most talented developers and the person who will be presenting our AI system today. Sarah has been instrumental in developing the core algorithms that make this system unique in the marketplace. James Morrison's eyes sharpened with interest, but also with something that might have been skepticism. Ms. Chun, how long have you been working in predictive analytics? It was a reasonable question, but Sarah recognized it as the first test. Her answer would establish not just her experience, but her credibility with this group. I've been working specifically with predictive algorithms for 4 years, but my background in statistical modeling goes back to my graduate work at MIT, where I focus on machine learning applications for financial markets. The system you'll see today represents the culmination of both academic research and practical problem solving in real-world business environments. Sarah had deliberately mentioned MIT and connected her work to financial markets, knowing that both references would resonate with Global Systems Corporation's business focus. She also noticed that Diana Chen's posture had changed slightly, suggesting increased attention. "That's an impressive background," Diana said. "I'm curious about your role in developing this particular system. Was this a collaborative effort with your team, or did you have primary responsibility for specific components?" Another test, this one designed to determine whether Sarah was the genuine expert or just a skilled presenter delivering someone else's work. "I had primary responsibility for the optimization algorithms that process real-time data streams, the integration protocols that allow the system to work with existing corporate databases, and the performance monitoring systems that ensure accuracy under varying data loads," Sarah replied. "The overall architecture was a collaborative effort with Marcus Webb, our senior developer, but the components that make the system practical for enterprise deployment were largely my contribution." She had given them enough detail to demonstrate her technical knowledge while acknowledging the collaborative nature of software development. Most importantly, she had positioned herself as the person who made the system actually work in practice, which was what they cared about most. James Morrison leaned forward slightly. "That's exactly what we need to understand. We've seen plenty of impressive algorithms that work perfectly in controlled environments, but fail when they encounter real-world data complexity. Walk us through how your system handles the unexpected." This was the moment Sarah had been preparing for. Instead of jumping immediately into her formal presentation, she opened her laptop and pulled up a live demonstration environment. Rather than just showing you slides about how the system works, she said, "Let me show you the system working with your actual data." The room went silent. Sarah had spent the previous evening connecting to publicly available financial data feeds that included Global Systems Corporation's stock performance, industry trends, and market indicators that would be relevant to their decision-making processes. "This is your stock price over the last 6 months," Sarah said, projecting a complex chart onto the screen. "And this is what our system would have predicted for the same period based on the data that was available 6 months ago." The correlation was impressive, but not perfect. Sarah had deliberately chosen a demonstration that showed both the system's strengths and its limitations. "As you can see, we accurately predicted the major upward trend that coincided with your announcement of the new manufacturing partnership. We also identified the potential volatility around your quarterly earnings release, though we underestimated the magnitude of the positive surprise." She clicked to the next screen. "More importantly, here's what the system is predicting for your stock performance over the next quarter, based on current market conditions, industry trends, and your company's historical patterns." Diana Chen was studying the projections with obvious interest. "These confidence intervals are much narrower than what we typically see from predictive models. How do you achieve that level of precision?" "The key innovation is in how we handle uncertainty propagation," Sarah explained. Shifting into the technical explanation she had refined over dozens of practice sessions. "Traditional models treat uncertainty as a static variable, but market conditions are dynamic. Our algorithms adjust their confidence levels based on how quickly conditions are changing, which allows us to maintain accuracy even when the underlying data becomes more volatile." For the next 40 minutes, Sarah walked them through the system's capabilities, answered technical questions that would have challenged even senior developers, and demonstrated features that directly address challenges she knew Global Systems Corporation was facing. She had studied their business carefully enough to understand their specific pain points, and she positioned each feature of the system as a solution to problems they were actually experiencing. But the real test came when James Morrison asked a question that had nothing to do with technology. "Ms. Chun, this is obviously a sophisticated system with significant potential. But implementing something like this requires substantial organizational change management. How do you envision the rollout process, and what kind of support infrastructure would be required? Sarah realized that he was no longer evaluating the technology, he was evaluating her ability to think strategically about business implementation. This was the kind of question that executives asked other executives, not the kind of question that technical specialists typically handled. She took a breath and shifted her approach entirely. The biggest challenge with any predictive system isn't technical adoption, it's cultural adoption, she said. Your analysts and decision makers need to trust the system enough to act on its recommendations, which means they need to understand how it works and where its boundaries are. Sarah clicked to a new section of her presentation that she had added specifically for this audience. We recommend a 3-phase implementation that starts with parallel operation alongside your existing forecasting methods. Phase 1 focuses on building confidence through demonstrated accuracy. Phase 2 gradually shifts decision-making responsibility to the system for lower-risk predictions. Phase 3 expands the system's role to strategic planning and major investment decisions. She outlined a timeline that accounted for training requirements, system integration challenges, and the political realities of changing how a large organization made important decisions. Most importantly, she demonstrated that she understood the difference between building a system and actually getting people to use it effectively. Diana Chun exchanged a glance with James Morrison that Sarah couldn't interpret, but she sensed that something significant had just happened. That's a very mature approach to implementation planning, Diana said. Most technology vendors focus on the capabilities of their systems without adequately considering the human factors involved in adoption. James Morrison nodded in agreement. Ms. Chun, I have to say, this has been one of the most comprehensive technical presentations we've experienced. You clearly understand both the technology and its business applications. Sarah felt a surge of relief and satisfaction. She had proven herself technically, strategically, and professionally. But then James Morrison continued speaking, and his next words reminded her that the presentation was just the beginning of her challenges. However, we do have some concerns about the support structure for a system this complex. What kind of ongoing technical leadership would TechVision provide during implementation and operation? The question was professionally phrased, but Sarah understood its real meaning. He was asking whether she would be the person responsible for the system after the contract was signed, or whether someone more senior would take over once the real work began. Before Sarah could answer, Robert Hartman spoke up from his position at the side of the room. Obviously, we would assign our most experienced technical leadership to oversee any major implementation. Sarah has done an excellent job presenting the system, but for a project of this magnitude, we would want Marcus Webb or one of our other senior developers to manage the client relationship. Sarah felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. After everything she had just demonstrated, after proving her technical knowledge and business understanding beyond any reasonable doubt, she was being relegated back to her supporting role. But this time, she wasn't the only one who objected to the demotion. Diana Chin's expression had shifted from professional interest to something that looked suspiciously like annoyance. Mr. Hartman, forgive me, but that doesn't make sense from our perspective. Ms. Chin clearly has the deepest understanding of this system. Why would we want to work with someone else who would need to get up to speed on work she's already mastered? James Morrison nodded in agreement. We're not just buying software, we're buying expertise. The person who can answer our questions and solve our problems is the person we want managing this relationship. Robert looked uncomfortable, clearly not expecting the clients to push back on his staffing decision. Well, certainly Sarah would be involved in the implementation process. I just meant that we would want to ensure appropriate oversight. And Mr. Hartman, James interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to getting his way. Let me be clear about what we need. We need the person who built this system. We need the person who understands its limitations and capabilities. And based on this presentation, that person is Ms. Chun. He turned to look directly at Sarah. If Tech Vision is awarded this contract, we want you as our primary technical contact. Is that something you're prepared to take on? Sarah looked around the room at the faces staring at her. Robert Hartman looked like he had just swallowed something unpleasant. Jennifer Walsh was trying not to smile. The Global Systems Corporation team was waiting for her answer. Yes, Sarah said, her voice clear and confident. I'm prepared to take full responsibility for this system's success. As the meeting concluded and the clients gathered their materials, Sarah realized that she had just committed herself to something far bigger than a presentation. She was now responsible for delivering on every promise she had made, for a client that had specifically requested her involvement, in a company that had never trusted her with this level of responsibility before. Diana Chun approached her as the room was emptying. Ms. Chun, I wanted to thank you for that presentation. It's refreshing to work with someone who understands that technology is only as good as the people who implement it. She handed Sarah her business card. I suspect we'll be working together quite a bit in the coming months. I look forward to it. As the Global Systems Corporation team left, Sarah found herself alone in the conference room with Robert Hartman and Jennifer Walsh. The silence was heavy with implications. Finally, Robert spoke. Well, Sarah, it looks like you got what you wanted. I hope you understand the magnitude of what you just taken on. I understand, Sarah replied. And I won't let the company down. You better not, Robert said, but his tone was more resigned than threatening. Because if this implementation fails, it won't just be your career on the line. It will be Tech Vision's reputation with one of our most important potential clients. As he left the room, Jennifer approached Sarah with an expression that was hard to read. Congratulations, she said. You just did something that most people never have the courage to attempt. You demanded respect, and you earned it. Sarah nodded, still processing everything that had just happened. Now I have to prove I deserved it. You already proved that, Jennifer said. Now you just have to do the work. Looking out the conference room window at the Seattle skyline, Sarah realized that her life had just changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. She was no longer the junior developer who built systems in the background. She was the lead technical contact for a $50 million contract, reporting directly to clients who had specifically requested her involvement. The question now wasn't whether she belonged in rooms like this one. The question was whether she could handle the pressure and responsibility that came with finally being recognized for what she was truly capable of. 3 months after the presentation that changed everything, Sarah Chun was discovering that success came with challenges she had never anticipated. The Global Systems Corporation contract had been signed, making it the largest deal in Tech Vision's history, and Sarah found herself in the unprecedented position of being the primary technical lead on the company's most important project. The implementation had started smoothly enough. Sarah spent her first month working directly with Diana Chun and her team to understand Global Systems Corporation's existing infrastructure and plan the integration timeline. It was exhilarating to be treated as the expert she had always known herself to be, to have her technical opinions sought and valued, to be included in strategic planning discussions that would have been impossible for her to attend just months earlier. But with visibility came scrutiny, and Sarah quickly learned that not everyone at Tech Vision was comfortable with her sudden elevation to such a prominent role. The reactions from her colleagues ranged from supportive to skeptical to openly resentful, and navigating these internal politics while managing a complex technical implementation proved more challenging than any algorithm she had ever debugged. Marcus Webb had returned to full health and made no secret of his displeasure with the new reporting structure. As the original architect of the system, he felt that he should be leading the Global Systems Corporation implementation, and he had begun subtly undermining Sarah's authority in ways that were difficult to address directly. During team meetings, Marcus would interrupt Sarah's explanations to offer corrections that were actually just different ways of expressing the same technical concepts. He would copy Robert Hartman on emails about minor technical decisions, suggesting that Sarah needed oversight that other project leaders didn't require. Most frustratingly, he had begun referring to the AI system as his project in conversations with other departments, subtly implying that Sarah was merely implementing his vision rather than leading her own initiative. The situation came to a head during a critical system integration test that Sarah had scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon in November. The test was designed to verify that their AI system could successfully interface with Global Systems Corporation's existing data infrastructure, and representatives from the client company were planning to observe remotely to monitor progress. Sarah had spent weeks preparing for the test, coordinating with both teams, debugging potential compatibility issues, and developing contingency plans for various failure scenarios. She arrived at the office early that morning, reviewed her checklist one final time, and felt confident that the test would demonstrate their system's capabilities effectively. But when she arrived at the testing lab, she found Marcus already there, making modifications to the system configuration without her knowledge or approval. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice level despite her immediate spike of panic. "I noticed some inefficiencies in the data processing pipeline," Marcus replied without looking up from his screen. "I'm implementing some optimizations that should improve performance during the test." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Making undocumented changes to the system on the day of a major test violated every software development protocol they had established. More importantly, any modifications made without proper testing could introduce bugs that would cause the entire demonstration to fail. "Marcus, we agreed that no changes would be made to the system after yesterday's final verification. The client is expecting to see exactly what we've tested and validated." Marcus finally looked up, his expression showing irritation at being questioned. "Sarah, I've been developing systems like this for 8 years. I know how to make performance improvements without introducing instability." "That's not the point," Sarah said, fighting to keep her professional composure. "The point is that this isn't your decision to make. I'm the technical lead on this project, and any system changes need to go through me." For a moment, they stared at each other across the testing lab, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah realized that this confrontation was about much more than system modifications. This was about authority, respect, and who ultimately controlled the project that would define both of their careers. "You know what, Sarah?" Marcus said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made her skin crawl. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I should have checked with you first. But someone needs to make sure this test succeeds, and I'm not comfortable leaving that responsibility entirely in the hands of someone who's never managed a project this important before." The dismissal in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah felt something inside her snap. She had spent months proving herself over and over again, demonstrating her technical competence and leadership abilities to clients, executives, and colleagues alike. But Marcus still saw her as the junior developer who needed his supervision and guidance. "Get out," Sarah said quietly. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct response. "What?" "I said get out," Sarah repeated, her voice stronger now. "Remove yourself from this lab. Undo whatever changes you've made to the system, and do not touch anything related to this project without my explicit approval." "Sarah, you're overreacting. I'm trying to help." "You're trying to sabotage," Sarah interrupted, her professional composure finally giving way to the anger she had been suppressing for months. "You're making unauthorized changes to a system you don't fully understand on the day of our most important test because you can't stand the fact that I'm leading this project instead of you." Marcus's face flushed red. "I understand this system better than anyone else in this building. I designed the core architecture that everything else is built on. And I optimized that architecture, debugged its performance problems, and made it actually work with real-world data," Sarah shot back. "The client specifically requested that I lead this project because they recognize that I'm the person who can deliver results, not just impressive theories." Before Marcus could respond, Robert Hartman appeared in the doorway of the testing lab, clearly having heard their raised voices from down the hallway. "What's going on here?" he asked, his expression shifting between concern and annoyance. Sarah took a deep breath, realizing that how she handled the next few minutes would determine not just the success of the day's test, but her credibility as a project leader going forward. Marcus made unauthorized modifications to the system configuration on the day of our major integration test, she said, keeping her voice professional. I've asked him to revert those changes and remove himself from the testing process. Robert looked from Sarah to Marcus, clearly trying to assess the situation. Marcus, what modifications did you make? Minor performance optimizations to the data processing pipeline. Marcus replied, his tone suggesting that Sarah was making a big deal out of nothing. Nothing that would affect system stability. Unplanned, untested modifications to production code on the day of a client demonstration, Sarah corrected. Modifications made without approval from the project lead, in direct violation of our change control procedures. Robert's expression grew serious. Sarah could see him weighing the competing claims, trying to determine who was right and who was overreacting. She realized that this moment would define her authority on future projects and possibly her entire career at TechVision. Marcus, Robert said finally, revert any changes you've made and step back from today's test. Sarah is the project lead, and project leads have final authority over system configuration. Marcus looked like he had been slapped. Robert, with all due respect, I think you're making a mistake. This test is too important to leave entirely in Sarah's hands. The statement hung in the air like an accusation, and Sarah realized that Marcus had just made the same mistake she had warned him about. He had questioned her authority directly, in front of the CEO, based solely on his assumption that she wasn't capable of handling the responsibility she had already been given. Robert's expression hardened. Marcus, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen carefully. Sarah earned this position by demonstrating superior technical knowledge and project management skills to our most important client. If you can't accept her authority on this project, then you need to remove yourself from the project entirely. The finality in Robert's voice was unmistakable. Marcus looked back and forth between them, clearly realizing that he had pushed too far and put his own position in jeopardy. I'll revert the changes, he said stiffly, turning back to his computer. No, Sarah said, surprising both men. I'll revert the changes myself. I need to verify that the system is in exactly the same state it was in after yesterday's validation testing. She moved to Marcus's workstation and began examining the code changes he had made. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Marcus had indeed made performance optimizations, but he had also introduced subtle modifications to the algorithm logic that could have caused unpredictable results during the test. These aren't just performance improvements, she said to Robert, pointing at the screen. These are fundamental changes to how the system processes statistical outliers. If we had run the test with these modifications, we could have gotten completely incorrect predictions, and we would have had no way to explain the discrepancy to the client. Robert's face went pale as he realized how close they had come to disaster. Marcus, is that accurate? Marcus studied the code, and Sarah could see the moment when he realized his mistake. The optimizations were more complex than I initially described, he admitted. But I'm confident they would have improved performance. Confident isn't good enough for a $50 million client demonstration, Roberts said sharply. Sarah, how long will it take you to restore the system to its validated state? 20 minutes, Sarah replied, already working to undo Marcus's changes. The test can still proceed on schedule. As Marcus left the lab, Robert stayed behind to watch Sarah work. She could feel his scrutiny as she methodically restored each configuration setting and verified that the system matched the backup from the previous day's testing. Sarah, Robert said finally, I owe you an apology. She looked up from her screen, surprised by his admission. I've been watching how you've handled this project over the past few months, he continued, and I've realized that I underestimated you. Not just your technical abilities, which you've proven repeatedly, but your leadership capabilities. Sarah nodded, not sure how to respond to such an unexpected acknowledgement. Marcus is a talented developer, Robert continued, but he's never learned to collaborate effectively with peers, and he's clearly struggling to accept authority from someone he perceives as subordinate. That's his failing, not yours. Thank you. Sarah said simply, continuing her work to restore the system. The way you handled this situation today showed exactly the kind of judgment and decisiveness we need in project leadership roles. You protected the client's interests, enforced proper procedures, and maintained professional composure under pressure. 20 minutes later, Sarah had successfully restored the system to its validated configuration and verified that all components were functioning correctly. The integration test proceeded flawlessly, with Global Systems Corporation's representatives expressing satisfaction with the system's performance and compatibility with their infrastructure. But the real validation came 2 hours after the test, when Diana Chun called Sarah directly to discuss the results. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you for today's demonstration. The integration went even more smoothly than we expected, and I'm confident that we're on track for a successful deployment." "I'm glad you're satisfied with the progress," Sarah replied. "We've put a lot of effort into ensuring compatibility with your existing systems." "I can tell," Diana said, "but I'm calling about more than just today's test. James Morrison and I have been discussing the implementation timeline, and we'd like to accelerate the deployment schedule if possible." Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. An accelerated timeline would mean more pressure, more visibility, and more opportunities for things to go wrong. "What kind of timeline are you considering?" she asked. "We'd like to have the full system operational by the end of January instead of March. I know that's aggressive, but we've been impressed enough with the preliminary results that we want to start using the system for Q1 planning." Sarah quickly ran through the implementation requirements in her head. An accelerated timeline would require additional resources, more intensive testing, and careful coordination between multiple teams. It was challenging but achievable, assuming she had full support from TechVision's management. "It's aggressive but doable," she said. "I'll need to bring in additional developers for the integration work, and we'll need to run parallel testing streams to maintain our quality standards." "Whatever resources you need," Diana replied. "James has authorized me to increase the project budget by 20% to support acceleration. The question is whether your team can deliver." "We can deliver," Sarah said with confidence she genuinely felt. "I'll have a revised timeline and resource plan to you by Friday." After hanging up, Sarah realized the magnitude of what had just happened. Global Systems Corporation had not only expressed complete satisfaction with her leadership, they had asked her to take on even greater responsibility. They were willing to increase their investment based on their confidence in her ability to deliver results. That evening, Sarah stayed late to develop the revised implementation plan. As she worked, Jennifer Walsh stopped by her desk with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that suggested she had something important to discuss. "I heard about what happened with Marcus today," Jennifer said, settling into the chair beside Sarah's desk. Sarah looked up from her project timeline, wondering how much of the incident had become office gossip. "Word travels fast around here," Sarah said carefully, "especially when it involves someone questioning the authority of our lead technical contact on our most important project," Jennifer replied. "Robert told me what happened, and I want to make sure you know that you handled it exactly right." Sarah felt a surge of relief. She had been second-guessing herself all afternoon, wondering if she had been too harsh with Marcus or too aggressive in asserting her authority. "I've been in this industry long enough to see this pattern repeatedly," Jennifer continued. "A talented woman proves herself technically, gets promoted to a leadership role, and then faces constant challenges from male colleagues who can't accept her authority. The key is to establish boundaries early and enforce them consistently." "Marcus is a good developer," Sarah said. "I don't want to damage his career or create permanent enemies within the company." "Marcus's career is his responsibility," Jennifer replied firmly. "Your responsibility is to deliver results for Global Systems Corporation and maintain the integrity of your project team. If Marcus can't adapt to working under your leadership, that's his choice to make." Jennifer paused, sipping her coffee before continuing. "I wanted to tell you something else. Robert and I have been discussing your performance over the past few months, and we're both impressed with how you've grown into this leadership role. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, sensing that something significant was coming. We're creating a new position, senior technical lead for enterprise projects. It would involve leading implementations for all of our major clients, with a team of developers reporting to you. We'd like to offer you the position. Sarah stared at Jennifer, hardly able to process what she was hearing. 6 months ago, she had been a junior developer whose contributions were barely acknowledged. Now she was being offered a senior leadership position that would make her responsible for TechVision's most important client relationships. The promotion comes with a significant salary increase, equity options, and a seat in senior staff meetings, Jennifer continued. More importantly, it would give you the authority and resources to build the kind of development team you think TechVision needs to compete at the highest levels. I'm honored, Sarah said, her voice slightly shaky with emotion. But I want to make sure I finish what I started with Global Systems Corporation before taking on additional responsibilities. Jennifer smiled. I hoped you'd say that. We're not talking about an immediate transition. We want you to complete the Global Systems implementation successfully, then use that experience to inform how you structure your new role. That night, Sarah drove home through the Seattle streets with her mind racing through everything that had happened. In the span of a single day, she had faced down a direct challenge to her authority, successfully managed a critical client demonstration, been asked to accelerate a major implementation, and been offered a promotion that would fundamentally change her career trajectory. But more than any individual achievement, Sarah realized that she had finally answered the question that had haunted her for years. Did she belong in positions of leadership and responsibility? The answer was clearly yes, and it had come not from someone granting her permission, but from her own willingness to demand recognition for what she was already capable of delivering. As she pulled into her apartment complex, Sarah thought about the moment in that conference room 6 months earlier when Robert Hartman had asked who authorized her to be here. She now understood that the question itself was wrong. Authorization didn't come from other people's permission. It came from her own competence, determination, and courage to claim the space she had earned. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the office to find an email from James Morrison waiting in her inbox. Global Systems Corporation had signed an extension to their contract, committing to a 3-year partnership for ongoing system development and support. They had specifically requested that Sarah remain as their primary technical contact for the duration of the agreement. Looking around the office that had once felt like hostile territory, Sarah realized that she was no longer fighting for recognition. She was building something that would benefit not just her own career, but every talented woman who would follow in her footsteps. She was proving that competence and determination were the only authorization anyone ever needed to change their circumstances and claim their rightful place in rooms where important decisions were made. The girl who had once colored outside the lines had grown into a woman who redrew the lines entirely. And she had done it without asking anyone's permission.